Picture this: you break into someone's house, steal everything they own, burn it down, then 150 years later, you want them to thank you for finally deciding to stop robbing them. Sounds insane, right? Well, that's exactly what happened when African leaders stood in front of the United Nations asking for reparations for slavery. And the comment sections exploded with Europeans and Americans saying Africans should be grateful Britain ended slavery. But here's what those commenters don't want you to know. The same legal framework that paid Jewish Holocaust survivors $89 billion, that compensated Americans $1.6 billion for internment camps, that gave slave owners $300 million when slavery ended, somehow doesn't want to apply to 12.5 million enslaved Africans. And the strategy behind why that's changing will shock you, because what I'm about to show you isn't just about money. It's about power. It's about who gets to write history. And it's about why the same Western nations that lecture the world about human rights are terrified of this conversation. In the next few minutes, I will reveal the legal precedent that makes reparation not just possible, but inevitable. But first, let me show you the psychology behind the most dangerous argument being used against Africa. So here's what actually happened. Kenya's President Ruto Williams and Ghana's President John Mahama made powerful speeches at the United Nations calling for reparations and permanent African representation on the Security Council.
30 years later, we African leaders are still making the same simple request for a permanent seat on the Security Council with the power of a veto. Madam President, the slave trade must be recognized as the greatest crime against humanity. As the African champion on reparations, Ghana intends to introduce a motion in this August body to that effect.
Within hours, the comment section lit with responses like this: Britain ended slavery, Africans should be grateful and thank them. Another comment: who captured Africans? Who made slavery illegal? Your own people sold you. Why should innocent people today pay for something that happened centuries ago? But here is the thing that stopped me cold when I read all this. Imagine your neighbor breaks into your house every single night for 400 years. He steals your family's jewelry, burns your furniture, and beats your children. Then one day, he decides to stop. Would you thank him? Would you call him a hero? That's essentially what we are being asked to do here. Now, there is an African proverb that says, and I use this proverb often, when the roots of a tree begin to decay, it spreads death to the branches. The roots of this debate aren't about gratitude. They're about something much bigger. You see, asking for gratitude does something psychologically powerful. It flips the victim and the perpetrator. It makes the oppressor the hero of the story. But let's talk numbers for a second. Between 1502 and 1866, over 12.5 million Africans were shipped across the Atlantic. Historians estimate that for every person who survived the journey, 3 were unalived on African shores or during the voyage. We are talking about the death toll that makes the Holocaust looks like a small comparison. Now, some of you might be thinking, that was so long ago. How can we prove legal responsibility today? Well, that's where it gets interesting. Because there is a legal framework that's been used successfully dozens of times. And in just a moment, I will show you exactly how it works. But first, let me ask you something. If your grandfather unalived my grandfather and stole his land, then your family lived off that wealth for generations while mine live in poverty. When does that debt expire? The answer might surprise you, and it's the reason Western governments are scrambling behind closed doors right now. Now, here is what they don't want you to know. Reparations for historical injustices aren't just some new radical concept. They are standard international law. Germany has paid over $89 billion in Holocaust reparations. The last payment was made in 2020, 75 years after World War II ended. The United States paid $1.6 billion to Japanese Americans for internment camps. That program didn't start until 1988, 43 years after the camps closed. But here is the kicker that will make your head spin. When slavery was ended, guess who got reparations? The slave owners. They got reparations instead of the oppressed slaves. Britain paid slave owners £20 million in 1833. That's equivalent to £2.4 billion today. Wait for it. You know there is always more. France forced Haitians to pay 120 million francs to compensate French slave owners for losing their property. And again, the enslaved people, they got nothing. Ana Lucia Arroyo, one of the world's leading historians on reparations, put it perfectly. The former slave owners and planters, they in almost all cases were awarded some kind of financial compensation after the abolition of slavery. But the victims of that same system, silence. Now, here is how reparations law actually work. It's based on three principles. First, acknowledgement of the harm. Second, accountability of the harm. Third, remediation to address ongoing effects. The legal principle is called ongoing violation. It means that if the effects of a historical injustice continue to cause harm today, the responsibility of addressing it continues too. But what about the argument that Africans sold other Africans? Well, here is the question for you. If a drug dealer convinces your brother to help him rob your house, does that make the robbery legal? Does it make the stolen goods any less stolen? The Atlantic slave trade was European controlled, European financed, European legal system. Local collaborators don't absolve the architects. And here's the economic reality. The racial wealth gap in America today is nearly identical to what it was in the 1960s. The median white family has 10 times the wealth of median black family. That's not an accident. That's the compound interest of 400 years of stolen labor. Now, you might be wondering, if the legal case is so strong, why hasn't this happened yet? But that's where the chess game begins, because this is not about money, it's about something far more bigger. So here is what's really happening behind the scenes. African leaders are not just asking for reparations, they are demanding permanent representation on the UN Security Council. Why does this matter? Because 5 countries that represent 16% of the world's population control every major international decision, and 4 of those 5 countries build their wealth on slavery and colonialism. Africa has 30% of the world's mineral resources, 60% of its arable land, and the youngest population on earth. But it has 0 permanent say in global decisions. That's not representation. That's taxation without representation. But here is where things are changing. California just passed America's first state-level reparations package. Cities like Chicago and Evanston are already issuing payments. Even the Netherlands king demanded an apology for slavery.
I make this apology myself, and I feel the weight of the words in my heart and my soul.
The dominoes are falling, and here is the strategic pressure point. Every dollar spent on reparations is a dollar that challenges the narrative of Western moral authority. If Germany can pay Holocaust reparations for 75 years, how do you justify not paying African reparations for 400 years of slavery? Think about what happens if Africa gets both reparations and UN representation. Suddenly, the same countries that lecture the world about human rights have to answer for their own historical crimes. And that changes everything. You know what struck me most about those comment sections? The desperation, the need to justify, the anger, because deep down everyone knows this debt is real. So here is what we are really watching: the end of a 500-year-old narrative. For centuries, Western powers have positioned themselves as the moral leaders of the world while avoiding accountability for the foundation of their wealth. But reparation changes that equation permanently. So here is my prediction. Within the next decade, we will see the first major Western nation announce a comprehensive reparations program for slavery. And when that happens, it won't be about justice, it will be about strategic necessity. Because here is what African leaders understand that those commentators don't. Gratitude is not justice, and justice delayed is justice denied. But justice demanded, that's power. So here's my question for you. If reparations are legally justified, morally necessary, and strategically inevitable, what's really preventing them? Drop your theory in the comments, but think deeper than the obvious answers, because the real reason might be the most revealing thing of how power actually works in the real world. And if you want to understand how this chess game ends, you need to watch what happens next in Haiti, because France just agreed to examine its debt to its former colony. That story is going to change everything. So next week, I'm breaking down why China is secretly backing Africa's reparation demands and how that's reshaping the entire global financial system. You won't want to miss that. I'm Asonga Luis, and this is the Strategic Lens. Keep thinking strategically. See you in my next investigation. Bye.